This is how we've mapped it out for buyers of translation services, appropriate way that you can approach your projects. I think maybe that red arrow, you can pull that one out about finding the right vendor and put that at the front of the process. It might be more effective to just start talking to people about translations, about your upcoming projects, figure out what it is you need to do. Pre-project preparation, you know, if you're translating a file that already exists, you've missed that boat, but maybe you can learn something for your next project. We deal with a lot of clients who don't seem to realize how much can go wrong, and they naively go tripping into the translation process. Very often, these are the people that I speak to later. When I ask them if they outsource translations, the attitude is like, oh no, we tried that once. It was too hard, it was too expensive, it was too painful. The results were disastrous. It does definitely pay to learn up front what's required and to be an informed consumer so that you can avoid some of the common pitfalls. You don't need to learn everything about translation. If you're manufacturing a product or providing a service, that's what you need to focus on, but you do need to know enough about translation to work effectively with a vendor and to evaluate and gauge their performance. Always keep your end goal or objective in mind. The first step in any project is to think about what you need to get to. Again, translation is not an afterthought. It's literally the last mile in your communication to be effective. So you need to be treating that as an important part of your project plan. The translated files are just a means to an end, that final communications link at the end of all your hard work. Your real goal is that successful training, the product launch, the happy user experience with your products, getting your Chinese immersion program accredited, or avoid having somebody sticking their hand in your wood chipper. Translation is completing the circuit in your multicultural communications. Don't lose sight of your business objectives. First step in our blueprint is the pre-project preparation. Again, you don't always have this luxury. If the file's already a done deal, then you're just going to start with what you have. If you can start at the beginning, if you haven't yet created your file, that's great, but you can also start from wherever you are. You need to get a little bit of education so that you understand what's going on. It's great if you've got time in your project plan to submit drafts so that you can understand what costs and timelines you need to be prepared for. If you have not yet written or designed your file, you've got time to manage things such as word count or formatting, which can have an impact on cost later. It's in your best interest to understand translation memory and how it impacts your projects. This is, in essence, a database that's the byproduct of professional translations. Some of the tools that we use to manage your projects will create a translation memory by language and by phrase. For the future, that adds simplicity to your projects because we can go back and reference that database. We can save you money, we can save you time, and we can ensure consistency from one project to the next. And if you've gotten feedback from some of your in-country people about terminology that they prefer to use, we can incorporate that into the database so that you don't have to retrain us on the next project. We've already got that information and we'll ensure that that's what you get the next time around. There are ways that you can create your files to limit the cost that's required. Things such as use of pictures instead of words, call outs where you're not embedding text inside your graphics, anything where you make the live text easily accessible to the translation firm is going to aid in the translation of your project. You may want to also take a look at adapting a mini version of whatever it is you're trying to translate, whether it's a catalog, a website. Sometimes it's not necessary to translate every single word, every press release, every software license. Some of these things can be left in English so that you can expedite your translation projects and complete them more cost effectively. It's helpful to understand how layout affects the cost of your translation, your choice of source files, and how you create your source files. When you're working with a outsource firm, live text is really critical. We're looking to grab your text, translate it, and put it back where it belongs. Providing us with the source files, as we mentioned earlier, is also critical. How you lay the text out and how you create your file is also going to make a difference in how easily it can be translated. Text for most languages is going to expand by as much as 30%. A lot of white space is needed when you create your English file to avoid us having to go back in and resize things to fit the translated text. A good example is PowerPoint text boxes. If you fill these up full of content, that presentation is going to need to be reformatted in order to accommodate the translation. This takes time and it costs money. Whereas if you would just minimize the amount of text within each box or made the boxes big enough to account for expansion, we could easily translate that presentation without having to reformat it. Even little details like hard carriage returns may require that we now spend a lot of time prepping your file. Prepping is just sort of a short form word for money that it's going to cost you to get this translation, because you're going to be paying for labor to put your files in such a shape that they can be readily translated. If you've got screenshots embedded in your files that are non-live, we're probably going to come back and ask you if there's software that you intend to translate. And if so, we would recommend that you translate that first so that you can have translated screenshots to embed into your translated manual. We're all about helping you make sure that what the user is seeing in the manual, what they're seeing on a screen, are consistent. Frequently, we encounter the wrong choice of source files, particularly MS Word being used for very lengthy manuals. That's really not the best choice of application. It doesn't have the capabilities of a FrameMaker for managing things like tables of content or indexes, and it's less stable than something like InDesign. So we may provide you a really nicely quality checked, translated MS Word file. And once we email it and you open it up on your own server with different levels of Microsoft, it might not look exactly the same as what we sent you. If you've got things like CAD files, schematic drawings, very often if we can communicate with you and work out a workaround, that's going to be a lot less expensive and a lot easier to translate than trying to work directly with the CAD files. Likewise, if you're working on a website, if we can get the actual XML, HTML, PHP files, whatever it is you used to generate the site in the first place, we can usually translate those directly and give them back to you so that they're ready to be immediately uploaded. So our goal is to replicate the look and feel of what you've provided. If we've got good source files that enable us to do that, it makes everything a lot easier and a lot more cost effective and time effective for everyone involved. Okay, let's talk a little bit about timing and process. Very often, translation is treated like an afterthought at the end of a very lengthy product development or documentation development process. Clients seem to have the attitude that we can take our time on everything else, but then we need to rush through translation at the very end because the product is scheduled to ship, or the training is next week, or we need to pack up for the trade show. If you're capable of planning for a trade show, then you're capable of working backwards from your deadline and making sure that you insert translation of materials onto your checklist. This may be something you need to educate your in-house stakeholders on, that they can't just snap their fingers and convert their files at the end of the process. Very often I'll hear people say that they need the translation back because they need to allow time for printing. You know, if you need to allow time for printing, you also needed to allow time for translation. And if you didn't do that, we're going to do the best we can, but it is possible that we're not going to be able to accommodate your deadline. Sort of like going to your favorite restaurant in town, walking up to the cashier and ordering a takeout meal. They'll tell you, you know, that's great, we can provide you with takeout, but it's going to be 20 minutes for us to prepare your meal. Well, I don't have 20 minutes. I'm on my way to the airport. I need my food in 5 minutes. Well, chances are your locale that you live in has options for getting your meal in less than 5 minutes. They're a lot different level of service than what you're getting at the full service restaurant, and the outcome and experience is going to be completely different. So you will find providers out there who will meet your deadline. They might be doing it by outsourcing every page of your documentation to a different translator so that you get back a completed file that looks like it was written by a committee, as opposed to a services group that's going to use a smaller team, one translation and one proofreader to accomplish the goal. So it's important, again, to understand what you're getting and to incorporate the right amount of time. Okay, we're going to move on to vendor selection very quickly. It's essential that you choose a provider who's a good fit for who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. And it may be different for everybody. Subject matter expertise is usually critical, but you want to get an understanding of how they do things, how they operate, what's included in their proposal, how they price things. When they give you a timeline, how firm is that timeline? And again, you do need a basis on which to compare all providers that are out there. I took my Google search, which gave me $5 million hits for translation providers, and I kept adding qualifying terms until I got down to translation providers near Minneapolis, which yielded a mere 635,000 providers. You're going to need specific relevant criteria for even selecting who to talk to, and certainly for selecting who you're going to do business with. Again, you're looking for someone who's going to be an extension of your team, and they're as important to the outcome of your translation projects as your own marketing employees, your own tech writers, or your own engineers. You're also going to be looking to build a level of trust and confidence that they're going to meet all their commitments, because you are buying a service, and buying a service is essentially buying somebody's promises that they're going to be able to deliver what you expect. So there are many, many variables in terms of language capabilities, source application capabilities, whether or not they offer formatting, the qualifications of the translators, their quality control process. It's up to you to decide which combination is going to be most essential to meeting your goal. When it comes time to execute your project, timing, which we already discussed, is going to be critical. Being in a crunch is going to be different than having the appropriate time that the translation services provider requested to complete your project. If you maintain a relationship with one provider or group of providers, it's going to be a lot easier to pull in a favor when you are legitimately in a time crunch by working with somebody who already knows you, especially if you're not one to cry wolf. If every single one of your projects is a rush, you might not get the same responsiveness as this is a one-time emergency. Working with the translation services provider to provide reference material is really quite helpful. You can provide glossaries that are in English if they define your terms and your acronyms. This is a great place to start eliciting the input from your in-country or your native speakers if they're willing and able to provide the translations for these things, or if they just tell you, you know what, that abbreviation, we just leave it in English. Everybody in our industry understands what that means. We can accept a glossary of terminology from you. You can provide us the translations, or you can provide it in English, or we can translate it first and resubmit it back for review by your in-country or native speakers. However you want to approach the project is fine with us. We do find that if you involve your in-country and native speakers at the front end of the project, the whole project goes a lot smoother. And when they receive the translations at the back end, they're usually very happy with what they receive. That's much preferable to just going on and doing the translation for them, and then you get it back, give it back to them, and then you get all kinds of input. Very often the input really says more about their personalities and their personal preferences than the quality of the translations. We'll accept their input, you know, we're fine with their input. Where in the process it occurs and how extensive it is may have implications for completion of your project on time. If we've already translated and formatted your file, and it's beautifully laid out in InDesign, and now somebody starts redlining the translation, this could cause delays or additional costs in terms of finalizing your file to your satisfaction. Finally, we'll move on to closing the loop. When you've completed a project, especially if you're new working with a vendor, it's very helpful to close the loop with that vendor, to give them feedback on how things went, and also to receive feedback from them on what you might be able to do differently for the future. If you do receive commentary from your native speakers, keep in mind that their preferences can easily be incorporated into future projects. We can put them right into the translation memory database. If you tweak files post-project, please send a copy to your provider for their records, or better yet, let us assess the input that you've received to confirm what's happening and then update your files. This will help for the future, maintaining integrity and document version control for you. Don't be afraid to ask if there's anything that you can do in the future to reduce the timeline or cost, or to help your future projects go more smoothly. Okay, well, that concludes our presentation. If there's any questions about anything specific that we've discussed, or really anything on any translation related topic that you'd like me to address, I'm more than happy to do that. Again, the chat bar is located at the bottom of your screen. If you just scroll down and click, that will pop up. Okay, here's a question about special considerations in managing multilingual projects versus single language projects. When you're working with a translation services provider who provides all the languages that you need, there's not much difference in managing a multiple language project than there is to managing a single language project. The language with the least availability of resources is going to drive the timeline for the entire thing. So if you need French, German, Italian, and Spanish, but then you also need Arabic, and Arabic, you know, there may not be as many Arabic engineers available to translate your project, then we might have to wait to get on their schedule. And so your project may take a little bit longer. You may have to allow a little bit of extra time, like a day or two, depending on the length of your file, for the project manager to complete the quality review. But generally speaking, we can turn a multilingual project as quickly and seamlessly as if it were a single language project. Okay, here's a good question. When vetting a translation service, is it appropriate to ask for samples? You know, samples are good. I don't blame people for asking for them. I generally would recommend that you provide your own content for a paid sample. You're going to get a much more realistic picture of what it's like to work with that organization, and you don't run the risk that your freebie isn't going to get the same attention as an actual paid project for a client. So if you can peel off, you know, 500 words or so, get a quote, submit it as a live project, you're going to end up with much better information than if you simply request a sample. Okay, one more question here about ISO certifications. how important is this when evaluating vendors? There's a lot of high quality vendors out there that don't have ISO certification. It really doesn't tell you firmly one way or the other whether you're going to receive high quality output. However, it is a really good box to check, because if you've got ISO within your own organization, you know that this is no small matter. It's a huge investment in terms of time and resources, and you're submitting your organization to external eyes for audit for your recertifications. So it's a good indicator that you're going to receive high quality output. And for many of you, your own quality control processes actually require that you have certified translations. And certified translations means that they were provided under the requirements of a documented quality system, and very often that you receive a signed certificate at the end of the project validating that this was in fact provided that way, and that we're assuring that the translations you receive are exactly the same as what's in your English file. So if that's a requirement for your organization, then you're definitely going to want to get an ISO certified translation provider. For others, it may or may not be critical. You know, the service at the end of the day is as good as the experience that you received, and there's no way to really predict that. You just have to kind of pick one that, you know, according to, you know, make an educated, informed decision on who to select, and then go forward and see if you're satisfied with the outcome. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to wrap this up now. If you do think of questions, again, feel free to contact me. You're going to be receiving an email with a copy of this presentation, so you'll have the slides with my contact information on them. Feel free to follow us on social media. If you've got input about this presentation, or if there's future topics that you'd like us to address in more detail, we'd love to hear your feedback on those as well. So again, I thank you for taking time out of your day, out of your week to spend with us. And if there's anything that we can do for you down the road, we'll be more than happy to help. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of the week.